Jack tried to clean his way into stealing $80 from our deposit, then kept the whole $485 when we said no. When we pushed it legally, the sheriff escalated it and he ended up scrambling to pay thousands or lose his SUV. Stick around, because today's stories will leave you absolutely speechless. Story 1. He tried to steal $80 from my deposit. He got hit with thousands instead. It all started about a year ago, when our landlord passed away and the place we were renting suddenly became a for sale situation. The property managers were actually great, but the new owner inherited the home and basically wanted it sold ASAP. Then this guy shows up, all smug energy, and we'll call him Jack. He comes to check out our unit, and I swear he barely even looked at anything. He had one of those Bluetooth earpieces in, spent maybe half of my nude inside, and acted like he was doing us a favor by existing. About a month later, we hear from him again. He stops by just to drop the news that rent is going up in 6 months, from $485 to $795. And look, our place was tiny, like top floor attic converted into a suite, with the bathroom basically tucked where the stairs used to be. It wasn't some luxury penthouse. It wasn't even close. We're like, absolutely not. We decide to move out instead of getting squeezed. We give the proper notice, and when we leave, we clean the place thoroughly. We're talking real effort, not good enough energy. And for the record, when my partner first moved in, it wasn't spotless, and the move-in inspection actually said so. So Jack waits until move-out time comes, then tries to pull a quick one. He tells us he's keeping $80 from our damaged deposit for cleaning. No forms, no proper paperwork, just this casual line like it's his money and we should accept it. I told him straight up, no, you're not. And here's the part where he really shows his intentions. He assumed we'd panic because we'd need money for our next place, next deposit, next bills. So he basically threatens us, pay him or he'll keep the whole deposit. Naturally, he keeps the entire $485. So I file with the rentalsman, expecting the usual runaround, but the investigation actually goes our way. They order him to refund the full deposit. That should have been the end of it. But Jack doesn't pay. At that point, the rentalsman can't physically enforce anything, so I have to go through the sheriff's office. They can send a legal demand letter, but it costs money up front, around a couple $100. I'm already out $485, so I do it anyway. Jack ignores the letter. Then the sheriff's office offers to start formal proceedings to recover the debt plus costs, but again, I have to pay an upfront amount, and it could take a long time. At that point, I get why most people quit. You could be out close to $700, keep waiting, and still risk never collecting. I didn't quit. They send him another, tougher letter. And this is where it gets delicious. Once the sheriff's office is recovering a debt, they can also go after other outstanding judgments he has. Apparently, Jack had pulled this kind of nonsense before. So more letters go out. Pay up or else. Jack picks else. Then they seize title to his big white SUV. They didn't immediately come drag it away, but they gave him a deadline. If he didn't pay every judgment tied to him within 30 days, they'd take the vehicle and sell it at auction. And somehow, right after that, he found the money. By the time everything was said and done, my portion came out to $885 total, covering my $485 deposit plus the legal and sheriff costs. Meanwhile, other people who had also gotten judgments but hadn't started collections were owed about $5,000 more. The whole process took at least 6 months. The funniest part is that Jack tried to steal $80 like it was nothing. He treated it like a petty, easy win. But it ended up turning into a full-on financial headache that cost him thousands. So yeah, Jack learned a lesson the hard way: don't mess with people's money, and definitely don't try to fake cleaning fees when you don't have the paperwork to back it up. Story 2, the poker table that exposed $1 million lie. It all started about a year ago, when my buddy said one sentence that basically screamed, "This is going to be a mess." He's an accountant with his own firm, and most of his clients are small to mid-sized businesses. But one client of his, a guy who owned multiple bars and clubs across 2 cities, was always skating on the edge. Late payments. Half the emails. Constant excuses. I was a regular at one of the guy's bars, so I already knew the place was busy. Every Thursday there was a poker night, and the room was packed. So when my buddy finally snapped and told me he had a client who wasn't paying him, I asked, "Who is it?" He hesitated like he didn't want to say it out loud, Then he finally named the guy. Let's call him Scott. I told my buddy, Scott isn't paying you? And my buddy goes, Scott says business is down. And I'm sitting there thinking, that's funny, because I'm literally watching people line up for drinks every week. Then my buddy's face changed. He looked at me and said, really? Like he didn't believe what I was telling him. So I told him about something I'd noticed at Scott's bar. Scott had this cash discount thing. If you paid cash, you'd get 15% off your tab. That alone wouldn't be crazy, but it stuck out because it was always pushed hard, like it was part of a bigger plan. My buddy got quiet, then he said, really? That's what he's doing? And right then I could tell his frustration turned into focus. A couple weeks later, he calls me up and asks, you going to Scott's place for poker? I said, yeah. Then he drops the next line, can I join? I figured, sure, why not? We go, we drink a bit, we lose some money at poker like idiots, and eventually the night ends with Scott crashing at my place because it's closer. On the drive over, Scott starts laying out his theory like he's building a case in real time. He thinks Scott is underreporting revenue, and the cash discount is the perfect cover because cash is easier to hide. Then he tells me his plan. He's going to do a deep dive into Scott's finances and see if the numbers match the product sales he's claiming. This is where it gets wild. My buddy has access to the kind of accounting info most people never see. He's not guessing. He's comparing. He goes through all 4 of Scott's locations, checks the prices Scott charges, estimates how much alcohol Scott must be buying based on what he's selling, and then cross-checks that against what Scott reports. He also looks at payroll, rent, insurance, bills, everything that has to be paid to keep those places running. And the math, honestly, didn't even come close. My buddy concludes Scott is probably underreporting income by around 35% to 40%. Then he digs further and finds it's not just a one-year thing. It's been happening for years. Years. Like Scott was shaving the numbers down every single time he filed taxes. So now we're talking about more than just my buddy losing money. If Scott is underreporting sales to his accountant, he's almost certainly underreporting to the IRS, and by this point Scott owes my buddy thousands of dollars he never paid. My buddy wouldn't tell me the exact figure, but he said it was enough to buy a brand new motorcycle. But instead of chasing Scott for repayment, my buddy decides to go after the bigger target. He files a whistleblower claim with the IRS. The idea is simple and brutal. If the IRS collects money, whistleblowers can get a cut. He estimates Scott has been hiding millions over the years, and even at 15% to 30% of what the IRS collects, the reward could dwarf the unpaid invoices. With a lawyer helping, my buddy gathers everything he can and submits the evidence. Then, because Scott still doesn't pay, my buddy fires him as a client. After that, it's mostly legal back and forth, waiting, and paperwork that feels like it's designed to test your willpower. Eventually, the IRS steps in, and it doesn't go gently. Scott gets hit hard, and it's estimated he underreported about $4.5 million in income. If you do the whistleblower math off what the IRS actually collects, the reward could land somewhere around $675,000 to $1.3 million. So I asked my buddy the question everyone asks at that point, how much did you actually get? And he just shrugs and says, I don't have a mortgage anymore. Then he adds, it would have been cheaper for Scott to just pay me. And honestly, that part stuck with me. Because the real revenge wasn't the money. It was the fact that Scott tried to hide his tracks with cash discounts and businesses down excuses, and the one person he owed ended up turning his unpaid bill into a federal problem. Story 3, I swapped their elite tequila and let them taste it. It all started back in 2018, when I married a man who was basically born on easy mode. His family had money, his life had structure, and he never had to worry about where the next dollar came from. Meanwhile, I grew up broke, and I learned early that if you don't keep your head up and watch your back, life will chew you up and spit you out. So when we first met, it was almost funny. I was working as a server at his uncle's restaurant, and he came in like he owned the place. He asked for my number, we talked, and I honestly thought I'd found someone who could see me for me. But the true colors thing? Yeah, that hit fast. He was a diagnosed narcissist, and once I was locked in, the mask started slipping. This story is about the first time I met his sister and her boyfriend. We picked them up from the airport, and as soon as he introduces us, she blurts out, "Oh my God, she's totally Jordan's." Like it was the most excited she'd ever been in her life. Her boyfriend laughs and agrees. My husband just chuckles too, like it's all harmless. I'm standing there like, okay. What does that even mean? Then he tells me, it means you've got great style. Like, you're giving homeless swagger. I thanked her and moved on, because at that point I was still trying to believe good intentions could exist in a bad dynamic. But every time they talked to me, they kept calling me Jordans. It started as a cute nickname, then slowly turned into something else. It wasn't just playful. It felt like they were labeling me, like I was a joke they could pick up and put down whenever they wanted. Then one night, we all got drunk. We cracked open wine, and the more they drank, the more bold they got. They started ripping into my wine, acting like it was the bottom of the barrel. I brushed it off at first, telling myself they were just being loud because they were drunk. Then the drinking game started. Truth or dare. And of course, the dare goes straight to my husband. His sister dares him to explain what Jordans means. They're all laughing like they're in on some secret joke, and he leans in and says, Jordans is the name we give homeless people who have swag. They erupted. Like it was the funniest thing on earth. I sat there with my stomach dropping, doing that quiet internal math like, okay, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. I wasn't as drunk as they were, so I actually understood every word. The next day, I finally asked my hungover husband what their problem was. I expected an apology. Instead, he acted like it never happened. He tried to dodge it with, it was just a joke. Don't take it seriously. But I kept pushing, because I wasn't going to let them rewrite reality in real time. Eventually he admitted the truth. He told me, I might have told them about your upbringing and how you're not like us. Just to prepare them. Prepare them. For me. Like my existence was a surprise package. I went quiet for a few days after that. I kept to myself. Made excuses. Stayed busy. Because in the back of my mind, I could feel something snapping into place. He bought an expensive bottle of tequila for them to drink before they left. It was supposed to be the nice thing, the kind of taste test where the rich people get to play judge. The last day before they were leaving, they went on a hike, and I pretended I wasn't feeling it so I didn't go. While they were out playing outdoorsy Europe influencer, I handled my little mission. I filmed myself swapping the bottle. I replaced the expensive tequila with Sauza Gold, the kind of stuff you can find for way less. Then I sat there, taking shots, talking to the camera like I was the narrator in my own revenge movie. I told them about my upbringing. About the love and loyalty my family had. About how I worked for everything I earned. And I made it very clear that I wasn't going to become some snobby, disgusting person just because I married into money. Then I went to bed. I got drunk off the expensive-looking tequila that wasn't expensive anymore, so I didn't have to sit there and perform. When they came back, I watched them like a hawk. They sipped that tequila like it was a luxury tasting menu. Then they started commenting on how distinguished it was, how delicate the flavor was, and how you could tell the quality. I let it build. I listened to them praise what they couldn't actually recognize. Finally, on their last night, I walked over, connected my phone to the TV, and said, I put something together for you guys to say thank you for your visit. I hit play. I watched their faces change while they realized what they were drinking, and what I was really doing. And then, the silence. Not the awkward kind where people laugh. The heavy kind where nobody wants to be the first one to breathe. I gathered shot glasses off the table like the whole moment was just done. Like they didn't get to be cruel and then act shocked when someone finally mirrored it back. I went to bed. But my husband woke me up furious. He said his sister was crying because I humiliated them. And I just looked at him and said, yeah. Sucks, doesn't it? The next day they left, and they never spoke to me again. Even when my ex and I visited his parents in Europe, she refused to come see us. Which, honestly, was fine. I didn't miss the feeling of being treated like a punchline. Safe to say, I'm happily divorced now, and I still think about that night whenever someone tries to act like they're better than where they came from. They wanted to taste my life like it was cheap. So I made sure they could taste theirs too. Story 4, she filed the emails. And Sandy filed the receipts. It all started about a year before Sandy even thought about taking over the travel agency. She worked at a small, owner-run shop in British Columbia, the kind where everybody knows everybody, and the hours are the same every week. Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, no games. But then there was Jane. Jane was in her early to mid-60s, and she had the talent of turning being at work into a whole scam. She'd suddenly need time off, then somehow claim overtime later, saying she was just going in after hours to finish up even though the owner never asked. And when she got caught, she'd act like the rules were optional. The owner was always hesitant to fire her, even after multiple warnings, because Jane had a history. Sandy's boss discovered that Jane had been booted from another local agency for doing the same kind of stuff, but Jane sued them for unfair dismissal and ended up winning a settlement. So the owner kept Jane around, not because she was good, but because she was complicated. Then the owner finally decided to retire and offered to sell the business to Sandy. Sandy said yes, because honestly, it was her chance. But she inherited the same problem, too. The owner told her, in so many words, try not to make this one legal trouble, and Sandy understood exactly what that meant. So Sandy tightened everything up. Clear guidelines for time off. A hard no overtime policy. Jane tried her usual tricks anyway, but with Sandy in charge, the plan didn't land as easily. Jane still had one move left, though, and it was sneaky. Sandy was a single mom with 2 hockey-obsessed boys, so sometimes she'd leave early to get them to practice or a game. Jane would wait until Sandy was gone, then book a day off without asking, like she was magically saving the day by being absent. Sandy would come in the next morning and see Jane wasn't there. And most of the time, Sandy didn't even fight it, because with the new rules, Jane couldn't claim some fake after-hours overtime rescue to cover it up. It was basically a lose-lose for Jane and a no-loss for Sandy. But this time was different. Sandy had to be away for 1 or 2 work days right before the weekend for a hockey tournament with the boys. She told both Jane and the other employee, verbally and in writing, that no one was allowed to book time off for those dates because Sandy needed them in the office. Then Sandy went in on a Saturday to handle paperwork and review the week's sales. That's when she found out Jane had already booked a trip. Not only that, Jane booked a Las Vegas vacation for her daughter and son-in-law, and she also booked a plane ticket in her own name to Calgary, where her daughter lived. And both trips lined up perfectly with the exact days Sandy said she'd be gone. Sandy pulled the vacation schedule again just to be absolutely sure, and yep, Jane had scheduled the same days she was told she couldn't take. Sandy didn't blow up. She emailed Jane calmly. She told her she would have to deny the time off because Jane had been warned those dates weren't available. Jane replied with a straight-up lie, claiming she had to go to Calgary because her daughter needed some long-awaited medical procedure and Jane needed to help with the grandkid. Sandy answered that with receipts too. She told Jane she knew about the Las Vegas trip, and she said, basically, the Calgary grandkid duty story was probably just babysitting while her daughter was off in Vegas. Still, Jane refused to admit anything. She doubled down and complained about being treated unfairly, then made her final move. She wrote that if Sandy wasn't going to value her, she was retiring and giving 2 weeks' notice. Sandy didn't argue. She forwarded everything to her accountant, who also acted like her business advisor. And here's the part that made Sandy smile later. The accountant told her, "This is your out. It's in writing. Jane has essentially resigned. She's not been fired. You just honor her notice, pay her what she's owed, and you do it cleanly." So Monday morning, Sandy came in early with her long-term boyfriend as a witness. She boxed up Jane's desk items and took only what belonged to the business. And because Jane was old school, she never fully moved client info into the computer system. That meant there was a small box of index cards with client names, phone numbers, addresses, and even credit card information written down. They waited. The other employee arrived, too. Everyone sat there like, okay, let's see what happens when she walks in. Jane showed up right before 9 o'clock, acting like nothing happened. She said good morning like she owned the place. But when she noticed Sandy's boyfriend sitting in the corner, her face changed. Sandy told her there was no need to drag this out further. Sandy said she accepted Jane's retirement notice and handed over a check for the hours Jane had worked in that pay period plus 2 weeks' wages in lieu of her finishing the final stretch. Jane looked like she'd seen a ghost. She blurted, "But I didn't retire. I'm not ready to retire." Sandy stayed calm and repeated the truth. Jane had given notice in writing. Jane kept saying the same line, over and over, trying to rally the other employee to back her up. But the other employee didn't bite. Jane then started rummaging through the box Sandy had prepared, and that's when her entire attitude snapped again. She realized the index card box was missing. She demanded Sandy return it. Sandy refused. She said it was business property and, more importantly, it contained private client information. Letting Jane walk out with it would put Sandy at risk for violating privacy laws. Jane refused to leave. So Sandy told her, if she didn't walk out right then, they would have to call the RCMP. And at that moment, her boyfriend called 911. The dispatcher was told there was a disgruntled former employee refusing to leave the premises. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived. Jane immediately started ranting about being fired and about the missing box of client information. One officer asked Jane to explain her side outside. The other officer stayed inside with Sandy and listened to her version. After that, the officer went back in, then told Jane to wait outside. They talked it through. Sandy and the officer explained what was in the box, and the other officer agreed it wasn't Jane's personal property. Then the police officers picked up the larger box of Jane's belongings, brought it outside, and told her to go home. And honestly, Sandy didn't stop there. The next day, she put up a big sign in the window congratulating Jane on her retirement. She even placed a small notice in the local paper. Then came the final paperwork move, the one that turned the knife the most. When Sandy filled out the required government forms for the reason Jane was no longer employed, she checked the box for retired. That meant Jane was not eligible for unemployment insurance benefits. So Jane tried to play the system with lies, trips, and last-minute time-off stunts. But Sandy didn't just catch her. She turned Jane's own emails into a clean, legal shutdown, and left her with nothing to fight back with except the same confused sentence, "But I didn't retire." Story 5, we bought paradise. Then Karen moved in next door. It all started about a year ago, and I'm not even being dramatic. We were late 30s, child-free, and we had saved for almost a decade just to get out of the rat race. Then we finally pulled the trigger and moved to this tropical waterfront dream spot. Here's the catch. Housing was insanely expensive, like Hawaii money expensive. So we could only afford half of a duplex. The side we bought was gorgeous and had most of the backyard, a gazebo, and a decent dock set up for our boat. The other side belonged to a woman named Karen, her boyfriend Billy Bob, and 3 kids who I swear had the energy of a small tornado. When we first moved in, the duplex had been rented out by an older landlord, and the leases technically said renters could use their backyards. But there were no fences, no lines, nothing. So everyone just acted like the whole yard was one big shared playground. The second we became the owners of our side, Karen decided that meant she could keep treating our space like it was hers too. I told her the truth, nicely at first. If she asked politely, we could try to work with her. But Karen heard polite request and translated it into use whatever you want whenever you want. And that's when things went from annoying to full-blown saga. One day, my husband and I are out back enjoying a couple drinks when a delivery truck shows up. Not a little delivery. I'm talking a giant blow-up setup, like somebody was planning a whole event. I go over and ask what the heck is going on, and Karen straight up tells me it's her kid's birthday. Then she adds the part that made my stomach drop. She says it's family and friends only, and that we need to stay inside because it's her party. At the time, I didn't want to be the villain and ruin a kid's day. So I told her, okay, but after this you don't get access to our backyard at all. Karen shrugged like I was inconveniencing her personally and kept setting up. During the party, an adult stumbles into our house like he owns the place. I ask where he's going, and he tells me Karen said she owned the whole property and that he could use whichever bathroom was available. So I point him to Karen's side, and then Karen storms into our house like a hurricane. She's screaming about how we embarrassed her in front of her friends and how selfish we are for not spare one bathroom. I told her to get out of my house or I'd call the cops. She finally left, and the party ended shortly after. But that wasn't the end. That was just the spark. Afterward, we decided we were done playing nice. We built a proper fence to define what's ours and what's theirs. While we were at it, we upgraded the patio, added a fire pit, and put in an outdoor kitchen. We're talking real money, real improvement, real we finally get to enjoy our home energy. While the contractor was there, Karen kept popping out to check on things, like she was supervising our property. I stayed vague and talked about the patio work, and of course Karen latched onto it like, see? What's theirs becomes mine. Then the fence crew started. Karen came outside screaming for them to stop. I stepped out, told the workers to keep going, and told Karen to mind her business. Karen did what Karen does and called the cops. When the officer showed up, I explained calmly that we were building a fence on our property line, and the landlord who owned everything at the time already knew about it. The cop gave Karen a real lecture, the kind where you can feel someone's ego deflating. Karen went back inside and slammed the sliding door so hard I swear the sound traveled through the water. We thought the fence would finally end it. Nope. Then Billy Bob entered the picture in full force. He wasn't just a boyfriend. He was the type of guy who'd throw cigarette butts and empty beer cans over the fence like that was normal neighbor behavior. And he'd do it because he felt disrespected by anything we did. Karen and Billy Bob also had a boat, a big 30-foot fishing boat. But their side of the dock only had about 15 feet of usable space. We had way more dockage on our side, and since we only had one boat, we rented out the extra spots month to month. One month, a renter tied their boat up along the property line. Billy Bob decided he wanted that spot for his own boat. So here's where the plot thickens. While we were out of town, Karen and Billy Bob allegedly posed as us. They told the renter to leave by the end of the month. Then they parked Billy Bob's boat in the dockage spot like it was theirs. I didn't find out until weeks later, when the renter left a nasty review online and said we reneged on a verbal agreement to let them stay longer. That's when I called and realized what had happened. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a stunt. So I called the cops. The officer told Karen and Billy Bob to move the boat or it would be towed. Karen and Billy Bob screamed that the boat was fully on their property. Then they switched stories mid-rant, claiming nobody could own the water, then arguing that we were lying, then acting like the rules were optional. And at some point, Billy Bob punched a cop. He went to jail. And honestly, I felt bad for the officers because they had to deal with that chaos. So the next day, I brought snacks to the precinct with a note apologizing for the neighbor drama. I know it sounds wild, but I was trying to keep things decent. We also took them to small claims court for lost rental income. I won the case. Did we ever see the money? No. But we did win on paper, and that counts for something when you've been pushed around. Then came the real revenge. The market was getting ugly, and we were trying to figure out what to do with our savings. That's when a perfect opportunity opened up. The landlord who owned both duplex sides was desperate for cash and tired of managing the property from across the country. He had one condition: the poor single mom renter, Karen, had to be allowed to finish her lease, which was set to end in July. We had the cash, no mortgage, no realtor needed, and an inspection had already been done for refinancing earlier. Everything closed in under 2 weeks. Karen knew the ownership changed, but she didn't know who bought what. Until about 8 days before the big move. I walked up to Karen's door, knocked, and she opened it with the kind of attitude that makes you think she's been angry since birth. I handed her the landlord paperwork, smiled, and reminded her rent was due by Friday. I also said she could hand me the check if it was easier. I've heard people say faces turn white. I've never seen it like that in real life, but I swear her expression drained instantly. I told her we were honoring her lease until the end of July. After that, she needed to make plans, because we were going to remodel before the next tenants moved in. Then I left. Bye, bitch. And just to clarify something for anyone who thinks we were playing games, we bought our half of the duplex first. Later, we ended up owning both sides. But our upgrades and improvements were done on the side we owned as a non-rental. Karen's side stayed a rental until her lease ended. Update-wise, the lease wasn't up yet at first, rent was paid on time, and she kept being loud and starting problems, but nothing major beyond the usual chaos. Then COVID hit, and the eviction process became a mess. The law changed how quickly things could be enforced, so we couldn't physically remove them right away. So we had to wait, file properly, and keep our cool while she tried to keep pushing boundaries. Meanwhile, we were exhausted because we planned to move our elderly parents in after a remodel. Dad needed shoulder surgery, Mom needed a walker, and driving 2 hours each day was wearing us down. Then something weird happened. Karen was still there, but in October her mother, Susan, moved in after her own landlord didn't renew her lease. Susan was an angel. She was mortified by the kids' behavior and the noise. She cleaned house like she meant it, both figuratively and literally, and the atmosphere completely changed. The kids got better. Karen got smaller, like a thundercloud realizing the forecast changed. Susan and I ended up hanging out. We'd share drinks in the backyard, bake together on weekends, and when Thanksgiving and Christmas rolled around, we cooked a big outdoor feast and played backyard games. Even Karen was not nice exactly, but pleasant enough to breathe. Susan insisted on paying rent, and honestly, I let her. We kept it month to month after that, and we told her she could sort out moving plans when she was ready. So here's the twist nobody expects: the revenge didn't end with a dramatic eviction. It ended with the chaos getting replaced by actual accountability. But trust me, Karen still knows what happened. She just had to learn it the hard way, and now the neighborhood's finally quiet again. That's all for today. Which story was your favorite? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and like the video for more insane stories from DT Audio.